In the controversial book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, author John Allegro shows with an astounding attention to detail that the roots of Christianity, and in fact all religious iconography and mythology, can be traced back to one central source. Something not of a different dimension of space and time, not of some extraterrestrial force transcendent of our science and understanding, but of something much more humbled, much more interesting, the Amanita muscaria mushroom.
Have you ever wondered why on Christmas we cut down and carry evergreen trees inside our houses, decorate them with fancy ornaments, and place presents underneath them? James Arthur wrote, "So why do people bring pine trees into their houses at the winter solstice, placing brightly colored red and white packages under their boughs as gifts to show their love for each other and as representations of the love of God and the gift of his Son's life? It is because, underneath the pine bough, is the exact location where one would find this most sacred substance, the Amanita muscaria, in the wild." The Amanita muscaria is the red and white magic mushroom that grows almost exclusively beneath pine trees. Their main psychoactive ingredient is muscimol, as well as trace amounts of DMT, an entheogen naturally produced in the brain's pineal gland. The pine cone-shaped pineal gland is an organ that produces the same DMT found in this pine tree fungus, and much more. Dr. Rick Strassman wrote, "DMT exists in all of our bodies and occurs throughout the plant and animal kingdoms. It is part of the normal makeup of humans and other mammals, marine animals, grasses and peas, toads and frogs, mushrooms and molds and barks, flowers and roots. DMT is in this flower here, in that tree over there, and in yonder animal. It is most simply almost everywhere you choose to look. Indeed, it is getting to the point where one should report where DMT is not found, rather than where it is." James Arthur wrote, "The pine tree is one of the well-known central relics of Christmas. Under this tree is where those who are deemed good find their reward in the form of a present. A big red and white rounded mushroom grows under the very tree we are to look under on Christmas morning to find our gift. Green, red, and white as Christmas colors comes from the evergreen tree and the red and white mushrooms underneath. The word Christmas originally comes from the Egyptian Christ, oiled or anointed one, and mace, the sacred cakes annually made and ingested by the Egyptians. This Eucharist was originally made from Amanita muscaria, or was the mushroom itself. The tradition existed all over the ancient world, but most of the iconography and symbology recognized today comes from pre-Christian Northern Europe." James Arthur wrote, "The very name Christmas is a holiday name composed of the words Christ, meaning one who is anointed with the magical substance, and Mass, a special religious service or ceremony of the sacramental ingestion of the Eucharist, the body of Christ. In the Catholic tradition, this substance, body, soma, has been replaced by the doctrine of transubstantiation, whereby in a magical ceremony the priests claim the ability to transform a cracker or round wafer into the literal body of Christ." Dana Larson wrote, "Although most people see Christmas as a Christian holiday, Most of the symbols and icons we associate with Christmas celebrations are actually derived from the shamanistic traditions of the tribal peoples of pre-Christian Northern Europe. The sacred mushroom of these people was the red and white Amanita muscaria mushroom. These peoples lived in dwellings made of birch and reindeer hide called yurts. Somewhat similar to a teepee, the yurt's central smoke hole is often also used as an entrance. After gathering the mushrooms from under the sacred trees where they appeared, the shamans would fill their sacks and return home. Climbing down the chimney entrances, they would share out the mushrooms' gifts with those within. Santa also dresses like a mushroom gatherer. When it was time to go out and harvest the magical mushrooms, the ancient shamans would dress much like Santa, wearing red and white fur-trimmed coats and long black boots. To this day, Siberian shamans dress in ceremonial red and white fur-trimmed jackets to gather the magic mushrooms. First, they pick and place the mushrooms to partially dry on nearby pine boughs, which prepares them for ingestion and makes the load lighter. This is why we decorate our Christmas trees with ornaments and bulbs, because the gatherers would always adorn trees with drying mushrooms. Next, the shaman collects his red and white presents in a sack and proceeds to travel from house to house, delivering them. During Siberian winters, the snow piles up past the doors of their yurts or huts, so the red and white clad shaman must climb down the smoke hole or chimney to deliver the presents in his sack. Finally, the appreciative villagers string the mushrooms up or put them in stockings hung affront the fire to dry. When they awake in the morning, their presents from under the pine tree are all dried and ready to eat. Dana Larson wrote, "The Amanita mushroom needs to be dried before being consumed. The drying process reduces the mushroom's toxicity while increasing its potency. The shaman would guide the group in stringing the mushrooms and hanging them around the hearth fire to dry. This tradition is echoed in the modern stringing of popcorn and other items." James Arthur wrote, "The ancient shamanic use of Amanita muscaria in Siberia is well documented. Despite governmental oppression against its use, there are still many who refuse to accept the authorized state religion and continue the shamanic traditions in secret. Just as the Siberian shaman, commonly dressing in red and white, would enter through the opening in the roof of a home where a ritual was to be done, Santa Claus also arrives on the roof and enters through the chimney. Just as the shamans would gather the mushrooms in bags, which they would bring with them when performing a ceremony, Santa Claus also, on the holy day, brings presents in a bag. Siberian reindeer also enjoy eating Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and thus are often used as a lure by the deer-herding natives. Since one of the hallucinatory experiences often felt on psychedelic mushrooms is that of flying, Santa's flying reindeer most likely derive from this.
The high priests of Israel would go out in the morning mist to find the manna from heaven. Those of you who have had the opportunity to study carefully will know that the word manna from heaven actually means mushrooms.
The manna from heaven was actually a mushroom, psilocybin, the magic mushroom. And there's many books have been written about the subject of the magic mushroom in the Middle East, and I think we all know that in the Middle East there is the problem with hashish for thousands of years, and the drugs have been floating around the Middle East for thousands of years. We find it in the Bible, the magic mushroom. We find in the scriptures that that which is referred to as manna from heaven is a word which means mushroom. Therefore, the high priest of God would go out in the morning, and of course, that's where mushrooms grow, is in the mist, in the dew, in the morning. And they would pick the mushroom, the manna from heaven, and of course, consuming the manna from heaven, they began to talk to God. In the book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, Mr. John Allegro, who was commissioned by the State of Israel for research, substantiates the taking of the magic mushroom by the ancient Semitic fertility cults in their sex worship, which predated and influenced modern-day Judaism. As we see pictured here, a drawing of the high priest of Israel. This is what the high priest of Israel looked like. You will notice that he is wearing a peculiar headdress. The headdress is because of the manna from heaven that the high priest consumed in their worship. The Hebrew god El was in fact a more ancient Semitic god, Saturn. And that's brought out very well for us here in Archive Orientali. Here we find in this excellent article that the Star of David, the hexagram, is actually the star of Saturn. And that's why today Hebrews worship on Saturday, Christians worship on the sun's day, God's sun, the light of the world. And there's still a disturbance among religious circles today as to what the correct day of worship is. Is the Saturday or Sunday? Well, it just depends on whether you're worshiping Saturn, the old ancient Hebrew god, or the Son of God, the light of the world, on Sunday. It really doesn't make much difference. It's all Egyptian. If you go back not to the Bible, not to Genesis, but to the most ancient writings in the world, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Rig Veda, you will find that in the ancient nations of the world, they had all the same identical stories. They had the story of the young boy that was swallowed by the great fish because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. They have the story of Nemo. The Babylonians had the great lawgiver who had golden hair and went up into the mountain of God. The mountain of God was the pyramid. He went up into the great mountain of God, and he received the great law, which becomes known as the Law of Hammurabi, the great Law of Hammurabi. And that law was given to, the Babylonians say, their great prophet, their great man of God, who went up into the mountains, King Nebo. King Nebo, the great lawgiver, who comes down from the mountain with the tablets of stone and gives the great law to the Babylonian people. Now, of course, the Egyptians picked that up, and you will find that in Egyptology, the Egyptians had the same story, but their great lawgiver was called Meses. Meses was the great, wonderful man with beautiful golden hair who went up into the holy mountain, the pyramid, God's holy mountain. And he received the law. And the great law he brought down with the tablets of stone. And when he saw, Meses saw that the Egyptians did not respect the divine law, he broke the stones and the great law. Now, of course, the Hebrews, taking that story, moving into Palestine with their worship of their god El, then comes the story of Moses. Moses is Meses. Meses is Nebo. It's the same story.
Now, St. Mark's is an operating cathedral. It's in operation, but it's also a tourist area, and they kind of lead people through like cattle. And if you delay too long and look too long at some of the mosaics, you get people running out from the arches telling you to move along and so on and so forth. Well, this happened one too many times with us, and my wife got a little bit suspicious, and so we backtracked. And lo and behold, right there was Jesus, and this is on the cover of the Failed God book. There was Jesus with the Amanita muscaria mushroom in his hand, surrounded by what appeared to be psilocybin-type mushrooms. Now, when I described this image in my book, I didn't get into a lot of detail because I didn't want to get into a lot of discussions about Adam and Eve and all that business. So I mentioned, male and female that were by the feet of Jesus. And as you look at the picture, you see Jesus with a mushroom in his hand, and in his left hand, and with his forefinger, he's pointing to his right hand, the hole in his right hand, and then his forefinger in his right hand is pointing to himself. Now, pointing in Christian art is very, very important, as you know, because it tells the viewer what to look at and what's significant. And so in that one picture alone, it's telling you that Jesus was the mushroom. Jesus was an experience. He was not a real, live, living human being, as far as I can determine. There's no evidence for him. There's no historical visibility. In fact, they had to invent that.
It is no surprise that Nordic Germanic gods have connection to mushrooms in their mythology. As Thor throws his mushroom-shaped hammer to the ground, mighty thunders and lightning cracks cause the real mushrooms to appear. As the horses pulling Odin through the sky in his chariot become overexerted, their blood-mingled spit falls to the ground and causes the Amanita mushrooms to grow at those exact points. Probably the first Santa was Osiris in ancient Egypt, who rode his flying chariot to and from the North Pole, was born on December 25th, and celebrated by putting presents underneath an evergreen tree. But if understood in its original mushroom context, Santa's not a conniving, omniscient list keeper. He's an entheogen, a plant or substance which is said to generate the god within. The word entheogen breaks down en for inside, theo for god, and gen for generate. Generate the god inside. If you have ever taken an entheogen, like psilocybin, DMT, peyote, or ayahuasca, then you are already aware of the spiritual or even religious experiences associated with them. As anyone who has tried them knows, and most anyone who hasn't fiercely denies, these entheogens put us directly in contact with that spark of the divine within ourselves. They allow us access to higher consciousness and open our third eyes. The outer material world dissolves, and the five senses return to a state of one sense, one consciousness. James Arthur wrote, "First-hand understanding is through the ingestion of the holy substances, of which there has been so much written that this brief exposé merely scratches the surface of. It is this direct communal contact which is truly the means whereby a human being can experience his true spiritual nature. One must take very seriously his or her own spirituality, for this is that which we truly are. As I stated in the opening sentence, this experience is of extremely great value, so much so that I feel it necessary to the evolutionary process of each and every individual, and inevitably to all of mankind. Santa Claus is an all-knowing icon that reads the hearts and intentions of everyone on the planet. Each child is told the story of the round man who wears red and white, and his associates, reindeer, little people, and Mrs. Claus. They are also told the story of a miraculous worldwide flight in a sleigh which results in presents being delivered under a tree. Yet when a child reaches the age of reasoning, he is informed that this story is all a fabrication. This revelation is devastating upon the psyche of a young mind. It is also at this time that the child is often comforted and pacified from the shock by very strong reinforcement that the religious systems which the parents or guardians profess are indeed factual, and an attempt is made to incorporate the respective religious traditions into the holiday as the real meaning for the celebration. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny have both been uprooted from their original positions. They began as mythological mushroom heroes understood in a spiritual context both by children and adults. Now their literal meaning has been suppressed, and a fake image has been corporatized by Coke, Cadbury, and others. The effect this has had is to turn mythological heroes into fantasies and lies. It was not meant for children to discover as they are coming of age that parents, family, and friends have lied to them about Santa and the Easter Bunny. It was meant for them to discover deeper meanings behind the mythologies, such as the ancient astrotheological understanding of the heavens, the knowledge of the zodiacal procession, the seasonal cycles like solstices and equinoxes. The whole complexity of the modern Christmas mythos is an unexplainable mess without the magic mushroom. The story is completely unintelligible. Dana Larson wrote, "Some psychologists have discussed the cognitive dissonance which occurs when children are encouraged to believe in the literal existence of Santa Claus, only to have their parents' lie revealed to them when they are older. By so deceiving our children, we rob them of a richer heritage. Many people in the modern world have rejected Christmas as being too commercial, claiming that this ritual of giving is actually a celebration of materialism and greed. Yet, the true spirit of this winter festival lies not in the exchange of plastic toys, but in celebrating a gift from the earth, the fruiting top of a magical mushroom, and the revelatory experiences it can provide. Instead of perpetuating outdated and confusing holiday myths, it might be more fulfilling to return to the original source of these seasonal celebrations. How about getting back to basics and enjoying some magical mushrooms with your loved ones this solstice? What better gift can a family share than a little piece of love and enlightenment?"
I'm puzzled. Are you really seriously suggesting that Jesus Christ was a mushroom?
Put pretty blankly, yes.
Surely you don't suggest that Jesus Christ and his various disciples were not human creatures.
Yes. You are dealing with a secret cult, a secret society. The stories of the New Testament contain certain incantations, certain magic names, which were really the names of the mushroom.
No, but
And
the
this
writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, these men who wrote the story, you are telling me they did not exist?
No.
None of them existed?
No, it's part of mythology. It's part of mushroom mythology.